I've always enjoyed the quiet, but living alone on the edge of the Alaskan forest introduced a new level of solitude I wasn't quite prepared for. My nearest neighbor, Thomas, lived about a 5-minute walk down the road. His was the only other house for miles. I had chosen this remote area for the peace it offered. The thick, towering trees surrounded everything, and at night the silence was so intense that it felt like the world had disappeared, leaving only me behind. Thomas was a good neighbor from the start. He was older, in his late 50s or early 60s, and always kind. He helped me settle in when I first arrived, giving me advice about wilderness living, and even bringing over homemade bread a few times. It was comforting to have someone nearby, even if we didn't see each other often. One evening, I was curled up on my couch, watching a movie as a winter storm howled outside. The wind battered the trees, making them bend and creak under the pressure. The fire in the hearth was my only defense against the biting cold that came with the Alaskan winters. I was just starting to lose myself in the movie when I heard a knock at the door. It startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone. I got up and peered through the peephole, surprised to see Thomas standing there. Opening the door, I greeted him with a smile. "Hey Thomas, what brings you out in this weather?" He hesitated. Before stepping inside, a strange look on his face. "I saw someone near your house," he said quietly. "They were circling around, wandering. I thought I should come by and let you know." A shiver ran down my spine, and it wasn't from the cold. Out here, so far from anyone else, the idea of a stranger lurking around was deeply unsettling. "Thanks for telling me," I replied, locking the door behind him. "Did you see who it was?" Thomas shook his head. "No, it was too dark, but they didn't look like they belonged here." I nodded, trying to suppress the unease creeping over me. After some small talk, Thomas left, and I bolted the door behind him. My eyes scanned the windows as I made sure everything was locked and secure. The image of someone lurking outside wouldn't leave my mind. I checked the back door one more time before heading to bed, hoping the storm would pass. By morning, the wind continued to whip around the house, making every little sound feel louder and more ominous. Eventually, exhaustion won, and I drifted off to sleep. I woke up to the sound of voices. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but the voices were too clear. Someone was talking outside. Groggy and confused, I slipped out of bed and made my way to the window. The cold air hit me as I realized the window was slightly open, just enough for the freezing wind to sneak in. Looking outside, my heart skipped a beat. Thomas was standing next to my house, but he wasn't alone. A man I didn't recognize stood beside him, his back turned toward me. They were deep in conversation, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. I stared at them for a few moments, trying to piece together what was happening. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe Thomas had gone out to investigate the person he'd seen earlier. Perhaps the stranger was the man standing next to him, yet something about the whole scene felt wrong. I closed the window and crawled back into bed, pulling the blankets up tight. Sleep didn't come easily, though. I lay there, listening to the wind, and trying to convince myself that everything was fine. Then, the unmistakable sound of shattering glass cut through the silence. My blood turned to ice as I bolted upright. The sound had come from downstairs. Someone had broken a window. My mind reeled as I tried to comprehend what was happening. Was someone trying to break in? I scrambled to the bedroom window and looked out again. Thomas was still standing outside, unmoving, but the other man had vanished. Thomas showed no reaction to the sound of the broken glass, just standing there, staring at my house, like he was waiting for something. Panic surged through me. I grabbed my phone and locked my bedroom door, hands shaking as I dialed 911. The operator's voice was a lifeline as I explained what had happened, my words spilling out in a frantic rush. They promised officers were on their way, but it felt like an eternity before I heard the distant wail of sirens approaching. When the police arrived, they quickly found the man who had broken into my house. He had smashed through the living room window, but hadn't made it upstairs yet. Relief washed over me as they escorted him out of the house. But what they discovered next chilled me to my core. The intruder wasn't a random stranger. He had been in contact with Thomas for months. The police uncovered disturbing messages between the two of them, detailing plans for something far worse than a simple break-in. Thomas, the friendly neighbor who had helped me move in, had been watching me all along, waiting for the right moment. That night was supposed to be the culmination of their plan. I couldn't believe it. The man I had trusted, The one who had warned me about a stranger was the real threat all along. Thomas was arrested, and I never saw him again. I sold the house soon after. There was no way I could stay there, not after what had happened. I moved to New York City, far away from the isolation of the Alaskan wilderness. But even now, in the bustling city, I sometimes catch myself looking over my shoulder, haunted by the memory of that night in the forest. He barked orders at the girl standing quietly by the door, no longer looking afraid. "Check the rooms," he commanded. She moved through the house, opening drawers, taking anything of value, while the man stood watch, his gun firmly in hand. Jenny, pale with fear, whispered, "It's going to be okay," though the tremble in her voice betrayed her words. The rain outside pounded harder, and I kept my gaze fixed on the man, afraid that looking away for even a second might provoke something far worse. The girl returned after a few minutes, her voice calm and matter-of-fact. "I think we're good," she said. It was clear they had done this before. Their movements were practiced and efficient, like a team well-versed in robbery. Just as they were preparing to leave, the sound of approaching headlights cut through the tension, casting long, sharp beams of light through the window. A car pulled up outside, but it wasn't theirs. It was the police. The man muttered a curse under his breath as the officers rushed up to the house, guns drawn, shouting for him to drop his weapon. For a moment, I thought he wouldn't, but then, after a tense pause, he complied, setting the gun on the floor. Both he and the girl were arrested, pulled out into the pouring rain. Jenny and I sat frozen, too afraid to move, until one of the officers came to check on us. Only then did I realize that it was finally over. My neighbor, Mr. Thompson, had seen the strange car and called the police. When my parents returned home, they were shocked, but relieved to find us unharmed. They hugged me tightly, vowing that nothing like this would ever happen again. But I knew better. The rain, the fear, and the terror of that night were etched into my memory. It was an experience I would never be able to forget, and a night that changed the way I saw the world forever. My name is Isadora, and this is a story I never thought I'd tell. There are some things you hope to leave buried, locked away in the dark corners of your mind. But sometimes those dark corners find their way back into your life, no matter how far you try to run. It all started when I moved into the old house on Willow Street. It seemed like the perfect place for a fresh start, a quaint, old home full of history. At first, everything was fine, but as time went on, strange things began to happen. I'd hear footsteps on the stairs when no one was there. Doors would creak open on their own. Shadows seemed to flit by, just out of the corner of my eye. Then one evening I stumbled across an old photograph tucked away in a drawer. It was of a young girl standing in front of the house. Her expression was distant, hollow, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Things escalated quickly after that. Each night I woke with the unsettling sensation that someone was watching me, though I could never see anyone. Then one night I heard it, a scream unmistakable and full of pain. Coming from the basement, heart racing, I grabbed my phone for light and slowly made my way down the stairs. At the bottom I froze. In the far corner of the room stood the hot girl from the photograph, dressed in the same white dress, her gaze fixed on mine. Slowly she raised her hand and pointed to a section of the wall that looked newer than the rest. My stomach turned. As I realized that something terrible had been hidden there, I couldn't stay in that house any longer. The next day, I put it up for sale. Before leaving, though, I did some digging into the history of the place. What I found was horrifying. Years ago, a young girl had been murdered in that very house by her stepmother. The body was never found, but rumors suggested that the stepmother had built new walls in the basement, walls that hadn't been there before. I never went back to Willow Street. The house still stands, waiting for its next tenant, and the girl in the white dress is still there, waiting for someone to uncover the truth. I pray that one day she'll find the peace she deserves. But as for me, I will never forget the night I saw her and the truth I uncovered in that old house. For some context, I live in my father's childhood, home in what used to be the center of a small town, the house being right next to the cemetery. It isn't something that I personally remember, but growing up, I used to have these terrible night terrors practically every night. My mom told me that I'd wake up to me screaming bloody murder in my room, but whenever she'd go in, I'd be perfectly fine and no one was there. Now, my mother is a very religious woman, so out of frustration, she yelled at my deceased, grandmother that she was supposed to need, protect me, and later on put holy water over each of the doorways in the house. After that, I never had a night terror again. As I got older and was able to recollect things, I would have these strange nightmares, either monthly or weekly, and it was always the same layout. They would take place in our upstairs hallway. I'd be talking to someone in front of the doorway to the stairs, when an older red-haired woman would walk around the corner leading to me and my sister's room. I'm not sure if she'd say something or just look at me, but I'd always follow. Now keep in mind that the lights would always be on the entire floor. However, when I would walk past my room, the light would be off. The room changed in my dreams with how I'd change it physically, and there would always be this darker than black figure on the other side of my bed just staring at me, watching my every move. After seeing the figure, I'd eventually make my way to the original person I was with, and that's when everything would go wrong. Majority of the time, the original person I was with would get hurt in some way. The main one I remember is the person, Gatina, shoved down the stairs. Eventually, I stopped having these dreams, around the age of 15-22 now, but they still haunt me, and any nightmare I've had since still involves the second floor. I don't know if this is the thing that gave me night terrors as a kid, letting me know it was still around, watching me, or if it was something else. However, I know of other people in the area who have had similar dreams, and family members that have seen physical apparitions on our property. Even a medium who was investigating the cemetery next door had said something evil was on our property. There's so much more I can do on this, but for now, if anyone has any ideas or similar experiences, please let me know. Hello everyone, this is my first post in Ghost Stories. So where to begin? So in 1999, my wife was a radio DJ and she took a radio job in Lebanon, NH, at a country music station. We moved from Maine to New Hampshire and found an apartment to rent 15 minutes from her job and was truly in the sticks. The house was built in 1840 with 2 floors and an add-on apartment on the side of the house. The original owners were a brother and sister. Not sure what his name was, but hers is Helen. We originally lived in the small apartment on the side, but when one of the tenants in the house left, we took the bigger apartment. This is when things got interesting. We used to see people running out of the house, and we would hear that Helen had turned the radio on, or the TV would turn on or off. As we lived there, Helen would shove on the bed really, really hard to get our attention. At night, I would tell her to knock it off and go back to sleep. In 2005, my wife had stage 4 breast cancer, and we had many doctor's appointments. One morning, as we were getting ready to leave for one, she had asked me to close all the doors. Before I left, she then went outside to the truck. A little info on the doors. They were very old and had latches on them. You had to press the handle with your thumb to open them. So I start closing doors and then go on to the next room. I hear the latch to the bedroom and hear the door creak open. Then hear the bathroom latch and the door opens. So to really test her, I close the door between the dining room and kitchen. The door is warped and you have to give it a kick to close it. I hear the floor squeaking and the door latch starts jiggling. So I say, come on, open it. The door flew open. It was one of the coolest events I have seen. Don't think Helen was ready for that kind of reaction with me. Polly passed in 2008 to her cancer, so I had people staying with me to make sure I was okay. One of my friends was staying with me. The next morning I woke up to her not being there and a note on the table. She said that she had gone outside at 3 a.m. to smoke, and as she was sitting on the steps, a woman in an old-style dress walked up the driveway and then turned and walked past her into the house. Helen's grave is just right up the road in a small cemetery. I could go on and on with experiences. I stayed there for 1 more year and then moved. I just could not stay there with all the memories of Polly. I drove up to the cemetery and found Helen's grave and placed flowers there for her and thanked her for watching out for us. I have never been back. So for context, this happened quite a while ago in a small town in a very rural part of Mexico. Personally, I do not live in this small town, but in other town a couple of miles away. This town is fairly small, as mentioned, and really only exists because of big tile factory that was built in the town. This place is also known as a rest stop for many semi-trucks passing through the lonely interstate. So the story goes that years ago, a trucker passing by the town decided to stop by and rest in one of the rest areas. Over time, locals began to recognize the black semi-truck stopping by every other week to rest. Well, on one occasion, while the semi-truck was making its way to the rest area, A truck going full speed hit the semi on the driver's side. Locals in that area called the police, but it being in a rural place, it longed for any aid to come to the scene. According to the locals, the collision was so hard that the truck was basically embedded into the semi-driver's side. Also, the cause of the accident was mostly likely due to drunk driving. No one in the accident survived. Following a week after the gruesome accident, the people in town began to report sightings of a black semi-truck roaming the streets of the town late at night. People in town were shocked because it looked exactly like the one that was completely totaled a week prior. Locals who have seen the semi report being followed by it and being occasionally spooked by its loud horn. Once they arrive to their destination, the semi just idles for a few minutes outside of where they are before speed off into the dark. Now for my encounter, it was late at night, 2 a.m., and me and my cousin had just left a party a few towns over. Following the drive back home, we decided to take a shortcut through this town. We figured it would be a quick pass though, and at the time we knew about what had happened in that town. While driving, my cousin had to shit badly, so we stopped a lonely gas station just down the corner. I stayed in the car while he went inside to do his business. Well, while I was waiting for him, a black semi pulled over to the side of the road next to gas station. I didn't think much of it, because they pass regularly here to get gas and whatnot. But today was weird because it was quiet, and we were the only ones there. After a few minutes, I started to get worried because it was just idling and no one came out of the truck. And I also remembered the story of what happened here. Anxious, I texted my cousin to hurry up, and 30 seconds later he got out, and I yelled at him to get in the car. I sped out the lot, and to my horror, the semi followed behind. My cousin, clueless, asked me what was going on, and I told him about the semi trailing behind us. I tried losing it by turning into smaller streets, but the truck was still tailing me. It wasn't until I floored it and took a sharp right, almost hitting a parked car, that I lost the semi. After that, I never passed that town before dark. Someone knocks at my door at 3:33 a.m. every night. I wish I hadn't found out who it was. Knock, knock, knock. The knocking was soft, barely loud enough to pull me from my sleep. Groggy, I reached for my phone and checked the time, 3:33 a.m. Who the hell was knocking at my door at this hour? My back still ached from all the unpacking I had done earlier that day. I had just moved into this new apartment, and it was supposed to be the fresh start I needed. Slowly, I dragged myself out of bed and shuffled toward the door. The moonlight streaming through the window illuminated the white painted door, casting eerie shadows across the room. I swung the door open, half expecting to see someone standing there, but nothing. The hallway outside was empty. Whoever had knocked was already gone. Maybe it was a drunk neighbor who had the wrong door. That seemed like the most logical explanation. Shaking my head, I closed the door and crawled back into bed, not thinking much of it. I couldn't have known that this would happen again the next night. Knock, knock, knock. The knocking woke me up again. My eyes flew open, heart racing. I glanced at my phone. 3:33 a.m. again. Frustration surged through me. I'd had a terrible day, and being woken up like this for a second night in a row only made it worse. With a growl of annoyance, I threw the blankets off and stomped toward the door. This is my second night in this place. Can't I get some damn sleep? I muttered, swinging the door open. But once again, no one was there. The hallway was empty, as silent and still as the night before. Angrily, I slammed the door shut and marched back to bed, my thoughts swirling with frustration. I tried to ignore it, but the knocking came back night after night, always at exactly 3:33 a.m. 3 knocks every single time. By the 5th night, the sleeplessness had drained me of patience. My nerves were frayed, my exhaustion now a simmering rage. I decided that I wasn't going to let it happen again without figuring out who was doing this. That night, I stayed up, sitting on the couch, waiting. The clock seemed to move slower than usual, but finally 3:33 a.m. rolled around. My eyes were heavy, but I was determined. As soon as I heard the knocking, I jumped up, raced to the door, and yanked it open, ready to confront whoever was out there. But once again, there was no one. I stood there staring at the empty hallway, my fists clenched in frustration. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered. Knock, knock, knock. I froze. The sound wasn't coming from the front door this time. It was coming from behind me. Slowly, my body tensed as I turned around. The knocking was coming from my bedroom door, which I knew had been closed all night. My heart raced, and the adrenaline that had fueled my anger quickly transformed into cold dread. I stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Was someone inside my apartment? How had they gotten in? "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky. There was no response. Cautiously, I approached the bedroom door. My hand hovered over the doorknob, trembling. After what felt like an eternity, I twisted the knob and slowly pushed the door open. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the scene before me. Lying in my bed was me, a mangled version of myself. My face was twisted in terror, my eyes wide and bloodshot, my mouth frozen mid-scream. My body was contorted, as if I had been in some horrible accident. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Before I could react, the door slammed shut in my face, sending me stumbling back. I fell to the floor, gasping for breath. Tears filled my eyes, and I curled up sobbing. I couldn't comprehend what had just happened. Had I really just seen my own dead body? How was that possible? I must have passed out from the shock because the next thing I knew, it was the next night. I woke up in the living room, my body stiff from lying on the floor. Dazed, I grabbed my phone and checked the time. 3:32 a.m. I sat up, dread filling my chest, as I waited for the inevitable. Knock, knock, knock. It was 3:33 a.m. The knocking had returned. This time, I didn't even try to get up. I couldn't bring myself to open the door. But then, as if in response to my hesitation, the front door swung open on its own. The hallway was empty once again, but something felt different. My eyes scanned the darkness, and then I saw it. A figure was clinging to the ceiling. Before I could scream, the figure dropped to the floor with a sickening thud. It was me again, my dead body. I was staring at my own lifeless eyes, blood streaming from them like tears. I couldn't handle it anymore. "Please stop," I screamed, tears running down my face. But it didn't stop. The knocking continued. Every night at 3:33 a.m., the cycle repeated. Each night I saw a new version of my dead self, each more gruesome than the last. Sometimes I was stabbed. Other times I was crushed. The horror never ended. I no longer ate. I no longer drank. I had stopped caring. What was the point? The knocking showed me countless ways I could die, and each one was worse than the last. I was trapped, unable to escape. The doors wouldn't let me leave, and I didn't know if I could survive another night. It's 3:30 a.m. as I write this. In just a few minutes, the knocking will begin again. This time I hope it finally kills me for real. I can't take it anymore. I'm terrified that this nightmare will continue forever, and I'll be forced to watch myself die over and over again. The knocking is coming. I hope this time it